and go home. You know?
Right.
Feel out of that air.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so yeah. So definitely.
No, it was tough because they make this on Sunday, and my son's in tournaments also. There's Travis.
That we love you.
This happens to be a weekend he's off.
Okay, gotcha.
But most weekends we're at some ball field somewhere.
Okay, so you're not stationary.
coach.
You're just okay.
I'm just traveling, taking him there.
Okay, gotcha.
He's only 15. You know?
Okay.
Almost forgot, huh?
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah, we finished. We have 5 tournaments so far this summer. We finished second 5 times.
Well, I guess that makes you second best.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right. Well, that's fabulous. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Wow.
We played a team from.
What position?
That's cool.
He plays first. He pitches. Sometimes plays infield, but usually first.
Okay.
He can play outfield too. He can play. He catches also.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
He likes to
Quite
catch.
talented. Okay.
But then want to catch all the time.
You got that one, right, Edwin?
It's too much wear and tear.
Yeah. Indeed. Absolutely.
He's learned that. He used to want to catch all the time, and I was like, well, I pitch and catch us too much, so I'll just
Ready to go, Doc.
spell the guy once in a while.
What's up, my people out there, Facebook? Yeah, we got Abdullah Latif in the house. You know, we gonna keep it 100 and talk about the good work this brother is doing in the community since he came home. And I know a lot of people was asking me, is he really gonna be there? You know, because Abdullah Latif is busy. Yo, he's here in the studio live. This is not pre-recorded. This is live. So tune in, check him out, you know, and support his organization.
I'm gonna start live streaming our Facebook Live. Can you do that again?
Yes.
So I think you are live now.
We ready? You gonna count us down? Okay. Make sure our microphones are all working. Good.
Recording in 5, 4, 3.
Hello, welcome once again to Justice Conversations from the Ivory Tower to the Street with your hosts, Dr. Brian O'Neill, Luis Suave Gonzalez. And we have a guest in the studio today that is Abdullah Latif, who is the head of the National Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth. So I wonder if you could start, Abdullah, by just explaining to me what the organization National Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth does.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. And just a bit of a correction. I am not the head. I am the Pennsylvania coordinator for the Incarcerated Children's Advocacy Network, which is a program established by the National Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. And so the National Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth was established 10 years ago. Our director, Ms. Jody Kent Levy, is the director of the program and the organization. And as a nonprofit, what we actually do is it's primarily an advocacy organization which advocates on behalf of children, particularly those who have been disappeared from society and subjected to life without possibility of parole sentences and other extreme sentences. And so we work as an advocacy organization to ensure that children are treated in age-appropriate ways, which doesn't involve, obviously, extreme sentences.
So some of your efforts have to do with lobbying efforts?
Yes, so we do not direct lobbying as such, but we do engagement with legislatures to try to change laws that impact children. But we also empower children to become storytellers, to share their stories, to help shift narrative around how we change children. And then we're also developing a community prosperity initiative, which is in direct response to former life sentence children who are now returning home and are obviously having issues with transition and necessary supports to not just survive incarceration and reintegration process, but to actually thrive. And so we're trying to develop the resources to help individuals thrive who have went through that horrible experience.
I see.
So let me just add this, Doc.
Sure.
For those that's listening to us right now live, let me say that that organization played a role in the Miller versus Alabama decision. Before anybody was out there campaigning for us, juvenile lifers, they was out there putting their neck on the line, going from state to state. We had brothers like Eric, and I forgot the other brother, the one that talk about self-care all the time.
Yeah, Eddie.
Eddie. Them brothers was out there campaigning for us before we even thought we could get a chance in Pennsylvania. I just want to put that out because some people don't even know. They see the organization and be like, what they do? They are primarily responsible for Brian Stevenson defending us in the Supreme Court and advocating not just for Miller, but for all of us. Because they campaigning that hard. And once we was out, they just ain't say, okay, yeah, we did our job, y'all out. I remember last November, they flew all of us out to Washington, D.C. Juvenile lifers from across the country. So we could all see each other, man. And it was a beautiful experience to see brothers from Alabama, Kentucky, Detroit. The first female lifer that was released from Detroit. That to me shows that that organization needs to be highlighted. It needs to be supported by our people in the communities, because if you look at these prisons, it's our people packing these prison cells up. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted Abdullah Latif to come on the radio show. Now, I've been asking him for a while, and I know he's busy, so I'm honored you here.
Sure.
Because who's better to tell the story than us? Here you have a brother that was a juvenile lifer himself. Now he's the chairperson and PA for that organization that represent us. And I'm honored to be a member of ICANN and the Youth Sentencing Fair for juveniles.
We should also define some terms here, because we shouldn't assume the audience knows. Unless they're regular listeners, they probably do. But Miller versus Alabama, why don't you explain what that did for lifers across the board?
I mean, Miller versus Alabama gave juvenile lifers in the United States a second chance. It states that you cannot keep a person that committed a crime under the age of 18 in prison for the rest of his life or her life. So based on that, states was forced. And I say forced because when that decision came down in 2012, our former district attorney, Steph Williams, which I think, the legislators should have restrict him out his power, saying it's not retroactive. So we had to, based on that, we had to wait 5 more years for the case to go back to the Supreme Court so they could say it was retroactive. But Miller versus Alabama laid the foundation for us to be here today conducting this show.
Right. Unfortunately, it doesn't end juvenile life sentence. It does take mandatory life sentences off the table. But
yes.
They can still commit juveniles to life sentences, justifying it. They have to justify it. So it's an extra bit of the process. But there's more work to be done, because you can still send a juvenile to life. Or you can give them 50 years or 60 years or 70 years, which is equitable to a life sentence. So
but what it does, Doc, what it did was it returned almost 5,000
sure.
Man and woman back to their families. People that really didn't need to be in jail.
Right.
Unfortunately, we still have a few that's still locked up, like Joe Ligon. They got like 67, 68 years in. They don't want to come home. But for the most part, it gave us a second chance at life. Right. To be part of the community, part of the society, and contributors. And if you see today what most juvenile lifers are doing, it's amazing work. You know, it's amazing work. These are guys that you threw the key away on. But here, we in the studio with a brother that's the head of that organization in Philadelphia. You know, like I always say, you know, I came home, one of my second job, I was working at the police station. You know, it might not mean nothing to a regular person, but when you look at the whole totality, you talking about a juvenile lifer that was in prison, supposed to die in prison. Now he's working at the 25th police district.
Right. Very remarkable.
You know, it's like, huh? How that happened? You know how it happened? Because we could come home and contribute to society. We could come home and get the job done just as anybody else.
So Abdullah, tell me a little bit about your life journey.
Indeed. So my life journey as a child wasn't a typical. I was a typical teenager. Come from a pretty well-to-do family, certainly not rich, but from the lower middle class income bracket. And so the family migrated from Philadelphia out into Montgomery County. And so I primarily grew up outside of Philadelphia in Montgomery County. And as I said, it was a typical youth. Actually was a church-going mama's boy for most of my upbringing. And I had an unfortunate bicycling accident where I flipped over the handlebars and landed on my face and actually severed my lip and needed to have reconstructive plastic surgery, which was actually botched. And so I had a grotesquely upper lip for which I used to get bullied and teased. And that went on for quite some time. And ultimately, I began to lash out and fight whoever would bully or tease me. And that would cause me to get suspended from school. And so, like typical parents, loving, nurturing, didn't understand my behavior, and I couldn't quite articulate all of the things that I was going through in terms of the bullying and teasing. And so they would place me on punishment, but I would sneak out while they were away at work. And it was in those instances where I would begin to hang out with significantly older adults, ranging from 18 to 21, 22, 23 years old. And then they would accept me for who I was and wouldn't bully or tease me, so they became my peer group. And being involved with them, of course, they were older, some obviously adult and of drinking age, others not quite so, but they were out of school. And so often we would drink, smoke reefer, and that just changed my whole life trajectory through the course of that. And ultimately, that led to hanging out with some pretty nefarious associates. So ultimately, fast forward a bit, through those relationships, I no longer hung out with my peer group, but older adults. And on occasion, we would involve ourselves in criminal activity, whether it was selling reefer or dummy bags of cocaine just to get money for us to smoke reefer and drink beer, or shoplift on occasion, stealing cars, that type of thing. And on a fateful night, actually, almost 31 years ago to this day, July 9th, 1986, I and an adult, 21-year-old adult, went out on an unarmed snatch and run robbery, during the course of which an elderly gentleman was pushed to the floor, thrown to the floor actually, and suffered a borderline fracture femur. We went to the hospital for the replacement of the correction of that fractured femur, and developed complications from that surgery, and 18 days later died of heart failure. And my adult accomplice and myself was charged with first, second, and third degree murder, voluntary, involuntary manslaughter, robbery, burglary, criminal trespass, and conspiracy. Ultimately was convicted of second degree felony murder, which in Pennsylvania carries a mandatory life without possibility of parole sentence. And so that's what I was sentenced to. That was, as you might imagine, being a child at that particular time and being informed that your life essentially has come to an end. You've been sentenced essentially to die in prison. I can't begin to articulate the level of despair, anguish, but also anger at how those circumstances resulted in me being charged as an adult to begin with, when I knew several others who have committed homicide and didn't have that fate, right? I knew other juveniles who unfortunately committed those offenses and was still tried as juveniles and convicted and was in juvenile systems until they were 21. And I knew adults who had committed homicide and ended up with 7.5 to 15-year sentences. And so for a crime that clearly lacked any intent to cause serious bodily harm, let alone death, and this be the case that causes me to be tried as an adult and with the consequence of a mandatory life sentence, yeah, I was beyond confused. I was quite livid. And I would be remiss if I didn't state also that I was offered a plea deal, which would have enabled me to be released by the time I turned 21. It was a 2.5 to 5 year sentence to involuntary manslaughter. My parents refused me from accepting that plea offer from the district attorney because under the circumstances, they didn't believe that I was liable for the death. Not that they didn't think I should be held accountable, but they were looking at my future prospects and what that meant if I was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. No one ever informed myself or my parents that what hung in the balance if I was found guilty was a mandatory life sentence.
And we going on a commercial break. You listening to Abdullah Latif on a Justice Conversation on Umsala Radio. Johnny, I know this town by heart, man. You ready? Edwin, I know it by heart. Edwin looked at her, I know it by heart.
Just a quick one.
Just here.
Just want to make sure they right. Against your voice.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, people out there, this is real. To all the young brothers out there that's listening, you know, don't think because you ain't actually do it, you can't get convicted. This state will prosecute a 10-year-old kid if they have to and overcharge you. Because that's what they do for most of us. They overcharge and hope something stick. So, you know, take heed and listen to the brother because it's real.
Ready? Recording 5, 4, 3.
Welcome back to Justice Conversations. Your host, Dr. Brian O'Neill, Luis Suave Gonzalez, and our guest, Abdullah Latif, who is a Pennsylvania coordinator for the National Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth. So, Abdullah, you found yourself then convicted, given a life sentence, and you're how old at this point?
At the time of the arrest, I was 17. By the time the actual sentencing took place, I was 19.
Okay. So, as a 19-year-old, you're entering Reintegration. Is that where you ended up at?
Yes.
Wow.
But he was charged as a juvenile.
Right.
That's the important part.
Right. At that point in time, there was no intermediate facility like there is today for young charged lifers. So you went immediately into the big house.
Indeed.
And how was that transition for you?
Yeah, that transition was a test to not just my resilience as a person, but it was a challenge to my very being, both intellectually, mentally, physically, emotionally. Being bombarded with a level of just wanton neglect, utter violence, and disregard for human dignity that was manifested by prison officials, guards, but also to a certain extent, even some incarcerated persons, and the violence that was visited upon one another. Again, this was over 30 years ago, which was vastly different from how prisons are today. To say that you are also always hyper vigilant, trying to ensure that you're not the victim of a stabbing, of being raped, molested, being extorted for a commissary. All of those things are ever present and ever real, and you see it around you constantly. And so if it's not a stabbing, it's a fight that's brutal, it's lock in a sock type violence taking place. And you're always thinking like, how am I here, right? It doesn't make sense, and you can try as you wish to try to make sense of it. But there's nothing that makes it make sense. And so, yeah, it was quite traumatic to be a part of and witness to what takes place, and especially what takes place in prisons 30 years ago. So, yeah, Greta Ford was a test to everything that I am. I can't say that it forged me into the man that I've become, but I can say witnessing some of the atrocities that I've witnessed, it etched in me and my psyche the need to be one of the ones in the forefront to change everything that is prison. I can't ever forget the experiences that I've witnessed. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I can't never imagine myself being silent in face of what I know, that others are still suffering. People who are as deserving as myself for second chances, who I know are languishing under the same stressors that I myself was going through. We won't be over exaggerating if we talked about how many times we just consider committing suicide. Not because a lack of strength, but coming to the point of, in my case, decades later, when does the suffering ever end? I can't imagine to continue to suffer like this week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, with no end in sight. And so I know that just as I had those ideations, just as I had those thoughts, that there's others who not only think about it, there's others who I knew personally who took their lives for the same reason. And so there's an unspoken tragedy and trauma that is incarceration as we do it in Pennsylvania that we really need to speak about.
Well, you know what? When I was in, people used to always tell me, how much time you got in? I used to always tell them, like, I got 30 years in. And I got a life sentence, but I never served a day. You know, I never served a day. And people was like, but you got 30 years in. But it didn't matter because you could have 40 years in. And with a life sentence, you're still not going home. So it was like you never served a day. You could serve 50, but it's like you never served a day. Because you can never say, I'm going home 10 years from now. You never say it. And for a lot of us, I say that, the suicidal thought came to mind a couple of times, especially when you get bad news from home, that your mother died or your father died and you can't go to the funeral. You got to live the normal prison life and still suffer that loss, But a lot of us was committing suicide in other ways. We was out there robbing people's cells. We became what the prison wanted us to become, savages. We did. I was part of that. Drugs, gambling, running stores, extorting people, people that I thought was weaker, because we never extort the guys that I thought was gonna stick the knife in us. We always went after the weak guys, so and for me what worked, man, it was like I got tired. I got tired of that life. When you a lifer and you serving all that time, you be like, man, there gotta be another way. There gotta be another way. And even though I never had faith in the commutation process, I was like, there gotta be another way, man. There gotta be another way. And I remember when I went to prison, and you probably remember this, everybody took shower naked. Everybody. And if you didn't, you was viewed on as, what's wrong with you? You're not a man. Years later, the brothers, got together. And I don't know how it happened, but then we had the shower where you could shower naked, but then you had the shower where you could shower with your boxers and stuff. And people used to say, oh, that's the Muslim shower. And I always laugh at that, right? And I was like, how do you figure that? Some people just don't want to see other people naked. I don't want to see another man naked. And I say that to say, man, that the contribution that some brothers have made in the prison system save a lot of lives. Because that little action of showering with your boxers and a prison like Greenville at that time saved a lot of young brothers from getting attacked, raped, molested. And and a lot of people won't say it because what? I say it. That saved a lot of people from getting attacked. And I attribute that to brothers, man, that took it up on themselves and said, And you even had brothers that intervened when some brothers were getting preyed on. If he ain't into that, leave it alone. Now, if that was your lifestyle, do you. But if that's not what he's into, don't do it. But society don't hear them stories because they view us as criminals and animals in that. But there's a whole lot of contribution that brothers in there that might not even ever see the streets again have done. We had law libraries in the prison because of the brothers. They got together and filed lawsuits, and we had ESL teachers in there because of the brother. And I benefited from that. Because before I got there, the brothers had filed lawsuit to get an ESL teacher. And these was non-speaking English brothers. They filed a lawsuit because they said the Hispanics need a ESL teacher. And now it's rule in the DOC that you have to have a ESL teacher. It don't have to be a Hispanic person, but it have to be an ESL teacher. And that came from the contribution that the brothers did, man. So just want to put that one out there.
Indeed. And just to reaffirm and to highlight some of the things that you said, because often it's not a monolithic situation, meaning that it's not all the same. All the experiences are not the same. They change from institution to institution, and even within particular institutions. Graterford, for example, on the time we came in, right, even before our time in the 70s and the 80s, the violence, right, it's just unfathomable. You talk about the Badlands, right? That was it, right? It doesn't get any worse than that. It's always a constant mindset of the survival of the fittest, right? And you're forced almost into a predatory nature, right? Just to survive. However, during those decades, there's also a transition that's taking place. And part of that is the aging out, right? As people begin to mature and realize that there is something to having self-dignity, self-worth, self-value, which also transcends beyond self and to your neighbors, whether that's your neighbors in the street or your neighbors who are incarcerated. And ultimately, you begin to create environments that are a lot more healthy, That's not to say that you can create the perfect jail environment, because that's a contradiction in its very nature, right? What jail, prison is designed to do in its very essence is to strip you of your humanity, right? It's about deprivation, right? And so the way that we experience life is through our senses, right? What we can see, what we can touch, what we can smell, right? All of our five senses. And to one degree or another, prison desensitizes all of your senses. You can't see the beauty of the world. You can't see the full panoply of colors, right? There's the prison drab, gray, steel, concrete, olive green walls, right? The same brown uniforms, right? You don't see the whole kaleidoscope of colors, this whole range of colors, right? That does something to you. When you can't feel the essence of a woman, to hear on a regular basis the laughter of a child, right? That does something to you, your humanity. It strips it away. And so everything in prison, even taste, right? It's not that we complain about food, but everyone knows about jail cuisine, right? You can try to do the best you can making chi-chis and all of this, but the reality is that you can't even taste a delicious meal, right? So everything that we use to experience life, prison is designed to either eviscerate it, to wipe it away, or to at least restrict it in some way, form, or fashion. That in its essence is stripping away your very humanity and your ability to live and experience life. And so even despite that, there comes a point through the process of maturation, as we grow and mature, that we insist that we have a better quality of life, even in prison. And so that gives rise to filing the lawsuits that Suave mentioned, insisting that no, we are human beings, we have certain constitutional inalienable rights, even as prisoners.
We're going on a commercial. We're going to continue that in a minute. You're listening to Brother Abdullah Latif, former juvenile lifer on Unspoken Radio.
We'll talk a little bit about how you hit the ground running when you got the news, when Miller came down, how you jumped into life, I guess, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And how Suave did it. See if your experiences are similar.
We came out about the same time, right?
Actually, we did.
Interesting.
Yeah, actually we did.
Recording 5, 4, 3.
Welcome back to a Justice Conversation on Unspoken Radio with Dr. Brian O'Neill and Suave Gonzalez. Brother Abdullah Latif, 30 years.
31.
31 years incarcerated. You come home, it's a brand new world. You know, cell phones, supermarkets, registers are talking to you, gas stations, you got to talk to them. I mean, I was culture shock. But you come home and you go right into the mix of what we know to be the world today. How that happened?
By the grace of God, first and foremost. But it started before I got here, right? The preparation, as I said, even though there was no expectation of ever being released, there was a expectation that I placed on myself to be the best person that I can be. And part of that, just to digress just for a moment, but I think it's important to contextualize, that you mentioned earlier about how people lose loved ones and can't even attend the funeral. And in my instance, I lost my father, my mother, both my brother and my sister during the period of my incarceration. And so my mother and father never got this opportunity to see me mature into the adult, to see me become the man that they raised me to be. The morals and the values that they instilled in me as a youth, they never seen or got the opportunity to see the fruition of their work in my adult iteration. And so it was upon me to honor them and what they instilled in me as a child by trying to become the best individual that I can be, despite the fact that I was incarcerated with life without possibility of parole. And so the foundation was developed from my parents. As I matured, those values that they instilled in me began to flourish and define who I was as a person. And so to fast forward to the point where I am now out, it was because of that foundation that was laid both by my parents in the maturation process that prepared me to deal with the travails of trying to piece my life together after being disappeared from society for 31 years. That said, there's no amount of preparation that can prepare a formerly life sentenced child to successfully reintegrate into society after that level of trauma without active support from friends, families, or organizations. In my particular instance, as I said, I lost all of my immediate family members while incarcerated, so I had no family to come home to, although I do have a wife, but I can't burden her with trying to take care of me. And so for me, it was doing what I can, which started out working at CEO, picking up trash and the likes from the side of the road. That wasn't my capacity, but that was the opportunity that was available to me. The fact that I had a paralegal degree didn't matter. The fact that some regarded me as being intelligent, thoughtful, and all of those things didn't matter. What mattered is that I was a former life sentence child, convicted of murder. And so the opportunities were very slim, except for menial jobs that were available that didn't reach the cost of living. And so still going through that process, because of the relationship that I did have with the campaign, as you said, they have newsletters and correspondence with incarcerated folks. That developed a relationship that I was able to cultivate upon release, which created an opportunity to do some work for them that ultimately led to a job as a full-time staff member.